Goedenavond iedereen. Welkom in Atlas, het Huis van de Diversiteit van de stad Antwerpen. Deze lezing wordt georganiseerd door Atlas Publiekswerking. Wij zijn het deel van Atlas die lezingen, tentoonstellingen, debatten organiseert. Allemaal rond diversiteit in de stad en rond onderwerpen daaraan gerelateerd. Nog eventjes reclame maken. Wij hebben daarachter nog een tentoonstelling. Dat is ook een product van ons, Schoon Volk. Gaat over van hoe kijken we naar onszelf, hoe kijken we naar de ander. Welkom om daar ook nog even straks een blik op te werpen. Verder ook nog even reclame voor onze lezingenreeks Dwarsdenkers. Jullie hebben daar op jullie stoel een flyer van gevonden. Dat is een lezingenreeks rond spraakmakende stemmen in het debat rond diversiteit in de stad, valkuilen, uitdagingen. Volgende week donderdag, dus precies over 1 week, is Yves de Smet hier, opinierend hoofdredacteur van De Morgen, over de rol van de media rond het diversiteit in de samenleving. Heel welkom om daar ook naartoe te komen. Maar vanavond zijn jullie hier natuurlijk voor een heel andere gast. Onze professor, helemaal uit New York, meneer Alon Ben-Meir. Hij is deze hele week al in het land op uitnodiging van het Europees Parlement. En hij zal een lezing geven over het Midden-Oosten, Palestina-Israël. En op jullie stoel ook nog hebben jullie een klein boekje gevonden met een uiteenzetting van hem. Dus mochten jullie na vanavond nog op jullie honger blijven zitten, neem dat dan vooral mee. En dan kunnen jullie daar nog verder in lezen. Ik ga hem vragen om zichzelf voor te stellen, want dat kan hij zelf het allerbeste. Hij heeft gezegd dat hij vaak lezingen geeft, ook vaak voor verschillende publieken. En dat hij zal beginnen met aan jullie een paar vragen te stellen om een beetje te peilen hoe jullie kennis is ook. En zodat hij daar ook op de beste manier op kan aansluiten. Dus hij begint met wat vragen te stellen en daarna zal hij zijn lezing geven. En dan aan het einde is er opnieuw tijd voor jullie om daarop in te pikken, als jullie daar dingen nog dieper op willen doorgaan of als dat nog vragen heeft opgeroepen. Dus nog een keertje hartelijk welkom aan onze professor en I give the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Yamina. Thank you, Janine. Where's Janine? Is she here? Good evening, and thank you for having me with you this evening. So how are you today? I can't see well because of this light in my eyes. But anyway, I'm delighted to be with you, and I hope that we can share our views on one of the most intractable, difficult conflicts of this 21st century. What I would like to do, in order for me, I do not have written speeches, as a matter of fact, because I feel this, I've been dealing with this conflict for more than 3 decades. So it's in my blood, it's in my head. I've been involved in the negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians for a number of years. But before I give you just a general presentation, I would like I'm not going to answer the question, I would like to hear some of you what it is that you are interested in knowing about. Again, I'm not be answering, I'm just be incorporating this into the general presentation so it will be more comprehensive and understood by the majority, if not everyone sitting in this room. So please just feel free to raise your hand, just ask me a question, and I'm just going to absorb it, keep it in my mind, and when I make the presentation, I will incorporate all of that and some. So just ask me a question, any question that you want. Yes, please.
Als jullie dat aarzelen om het in het Engels te stellen, wil ik het voor jullie vertalen. Ik ben geen beëdigde tolk, maar ik ga mijn best doen. Dus laat dat zeker geen drempel zijn om een vraag te stellen.
Yes, please.
I understood that you had a question. That your question was, why am I here?
No. What I'm saying is that I'm going to be talking to you. I'll be making a presentation, but I'd like to know what it is that you want to know. What it is, how much do you know about this conflict? Because I can make a speech, and then it may be resonate with some and does not resonate with others. So I'd like to know what it is that you would like to know as well, and then I'll put it all together. That doesn't change the context of what I have to say whatsoever. I just want to gear it and tailor it to the audience. That's the idea. So now you can go with your question. Again, I'm not going to answer the question. I'm just going to keep it in mind.
Okay. For me, the conflict Israel-Palestine, for me, it's rather new, because it's only since 1 year that I visited Palestine, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and it shocked me to see that, because before I had 35 years experience in development cooperation in Africa and Latin America.
So you don't know much about the conflict itself?
That specific conflict, and it
Okay.
shocked me.
Okay.
And so what's my interest in this? How can that point, what's the best approach
to resolve
to
it.
work to a resolution?
Okay, fair enough.
That's my point.
Absolutely, yes.
I've talked to some Israelis recently, and they quite often give the argument that they would like to negotiate, but that there's no one to negotiate with, because Palestine doesn't have strong leadership. And I was wondering if you have comments on that.
Absolutely, I will incorporate with that as well. Yes.
Okay, I think that for a lot of people who follow the conflict during the past years, decades, it seems to become like a hopeless conflict, never-ending story. And I'm interested in your opinion if this conflict will has a chance of ever being resolved.
Absolutely, I will deal with that as well. I'll take just a few more, and then we will begin.
I just would like to ask if the inequality of power between Israelis and Palestinians.
The what?
Power, the power they have as economic power and political power and international support makes a difference in the conflict, and also the role of history as an argument, and ignorance on the what's happening on the both sides.
Okay. Take two more questions and then we'll begin. Go ahead, please.
I am interested in your reaction on this chain through history of peace mediators, the last of which is Tony Blair, who finished his job yesterday, and your perspective on that. Which peace mediator was the best, and why, and where were we so close because of this peace mediation? I would like to have an interpretation on that, please. Thank you.
Sure. And there's a couple of questions here.
I read beforehand that you were...
I'm sorry?
I read beforehand that you were quite, or still positive about the future of the region, or that you, well, since you were negotiating, that you believe in negotiations. And honestly, like a lot of people, I think I see also the never-ending story. And I, just from a gut feeling, I rather expect a lot more wars than a solution by negotiation. So I'm curious how you still can be positive about it, especially with your experience and background.
If I weren't positive, I won't be here today.
Good evening. Actually, I have two questions. The first is, what do you think is the real point of view of the current Israeli government in this conflict? And second of all, I wonder, is there a difference in point of view of the public opinion within Israel or without? And I mean by the Jewish population. So is there a difference in Jews
Certainly.
who live in Israel and abroad?
Okay. All right, I think we can stop here and we begin. What I'm going to do is talk about 35 or so minutes, and then we will have an opportunity then to ask questions, and I will be answering these questions as you ask them. But before I begin, I want to thank again Janina for a wonderful introduction, although I did not understand, but I can imagine what you have said. And Janine, where are you? And thank you. Pardon? Janine and Yamina. So forgive my confusion with the names. That is one thing I'm bad at. I don't remember names well, but I remember beautiful faces. Thank you for having me here again. Let me begin by suggesting something that, by and large, has not been discussed neither in the media nor in the public domain in terms of the narratives that both sides have been engaged in for the last almost 70 years, and specifically since the 1967 war and the beginning of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands. What has not been discussed, and in my view, is the most stumbling problem that has prevented both sides from reaching an agreement, is not really as much as territory, is not as much who wants what and the other party doesn't want to give, but there is very serious psychological dimension. That is, there is a psychological block that is preventing both sides from finding a way to reconcile their differences. What is this psychological block actually impacts every conflicting issue between the two sides. Let me just give you 2 or 3 examples so I understand what we are talking about in terms of psychological dimension of the conflict, and then we will go into the nitty-gritty of the conflicting issue and how these issues might be resolved. One of the major psychological difficulties, and that is to adjust, so that's the historical perspective. I just want you to think for a moment. You have on the one side the Israelis, who have had horrifying experience in the wake of World War II. And they have brought to Israel those memories with them and stays with them to this very moment as we speak today. You look at the Palestinian side, and they will speak about the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. And they brought that with them to this very day. What they've done, both sides, deliberately or inadvertently, passed on these horrifying experiences from one generation to the next, which means the sense of victimhood that the Palestinian experienced during the 48, during the Nakba effort, and what the Israelis, the Jews experienced in Europe, they passed on these feelings, experiences, tragedies into the next generation and the following generation. What the problem we see today, if you go to Israel or Palestine, you talk to Israeli young men like 10, 12, 15 years old, or their counterpart on the Palestinian side, and they'll talk about their horrifying experiences as if they were themselves victims of the Holocaust, or they were themselves being affected directly by the war of 1948 and the creation of the refugee problems. So what happened during all this period, the leaders on both sides perpetuated their historic experience, and they did not want to sit down and reconcile, to begin to reconcile what we call the historic narrative. So each has been involved in their own views about what happened, and they could not find a common language, what in fact took place, and what it's going to take in order to reconcile the historic narrative. That is not to suggest that the Palestinian caused the problem of the Holocaust, and not to suggest otherwise. What I'm suggesting to you is that when you have these kind of experience, you are developing a certain mindset about where you are, who you are, where you want to be, and what are these implications. For Israel, for example, the experience of the Holocaust created a mindset, created a deep sense of insecurity, lack of trust to anyone, at any time, in any place. For the Palestinian, taking away their land, from their perspective, this is a people who came to Palestine and usurped their land from them. They could not see themselves reconciling that. So this historic narrative that was irreconcilable continued to exist to this very moment. Let me give you another psychological aspect, which is the religious dimension of the conflict. If you look at the Israeli side, the Jewish side, they will tell you that this land, all of Palestine, Israel today, West Bank and Gaza, has been bequeathed to the Jews in eternity, all of it to the Jews, because that's what the Bible has said. This is what the history suggests. But the Palestinian will also tell you, well, we've been living there more than 1,000 years. As a matter of fact, Muhammad, in his journey to heaven, he stopped in Jerusalem. So we have also very powerful religious affinity to the same land, to the same place, to Jerusalem. Here too you have a serious gap, psychological gap, religiously oriented, being that both sides believe that from a religious perspective, this land belonged to them. Regardless of how many years the Jews existed there before or how many years the Palestinian existed in that particular land. So here too you have this, and over the years, neither side was willing to reconcile the religious implication of the conflict. And that has, of course, direct impact on the future of Jerusalem. So you take the Israeli experience in terms of what happened subsequent to the Holocaust and the immigration of many Jews from Europe and elsewhere and the Arab countries to what is Israel today. They have that sense of complete insecurity. That is, because of these experiences, they came to this place, and now from their perspective, we can no longer trust anyone, which means we have to acquire such security apparatus that is not going to allow anyone from within or outside the territories to threaten them anymore. And to that end, they have done everything humanly possible to build one of the most formidable militaries, especially in the Middle East, to say the least, and made certain and continue to try to make certain that they attain absolute security for themselves. But as you can well imagine, if I feel myself absolutely secure, my counterpart, my enemy, is going to feel absolutely insecure. Which means now the experiences have created national security concern. And that national security concern was not just limited to building a powerful military and the kind of security apparatus that is to guarantee the security of the state, but also began to try to find facts, to build facts on the ground to guarantee that security. This will begin to explain to you the tendency that is when the Israelis started to build settlement. From their perspective, the borders of 1967 are not secure enough. They need to be improved. They need to be fortified. And the only way to safeguard Jerusalem and to safeguard the heartland of Israel is to expand the Israeli presence in the West Bank and to build these settlements. That's how they see it. They linked national security to the expansion, to the building of settlement in order to push the Palestinians as much further deep toward the Jordan River as possible. Well, for the Palestinians, this is obviously totally unacceptable, and for good reason. from their perspective, this is our land. And what they saw now, Israelis came in and encroaching upon their own territory under the guise of national security. What happened beyond that when it comes to national security, this was begun to be not only the genuine aspect of it. There's always a genuine element to national security. There's no question about it. But governments from the right of center began systematically to use national security as a cover by which to annex and expropriate more and more Palestinian land, which continue to further and more so to aggravate the situation between the two sides. If I were to stop here just to limit myself to the three dimensions of the psychological implication here, you have to understand then how these issues began to impact every conflicting issues between the two sides. But I think it's wise also to mention to you one other element, which is the Palestinian refugees, which is one of the most painful consequence of the war of 1948. For the Palestinians, this is my land. I've been here for generations and generations. And now all of a sudden, I have become a refugee. Nearly 600,000 or 650,000 Palestinians were pushed out or encouraged to leave their places of residences. For them, then, the right of return to where to the homes and places where they left become a sine qua non, a precondition to reaching an agreement. On the other hand, the places where they lived no longer exist. No longer exist. And from the Israeli perspective, if Israel is to accept back the refugees, there were 650,000 in 1948 and some more, a couple of 100,000 added in 1967. And now there are roughly more than 5 million, if you count their descendants, their children and grandchildren, etc. Yeah, 5 million. If Israel is to accept 2 or 3 or 4 million, or even less than that, Israel will no longer be a Jewish state. But that was the principal ideology, the principal reason why the Jews wanted to create a Jewish state in order to provide them with the safety, the refuge that they needed, having been persecuted and segregated against and expelled for centuries, even before World War II. So for them, then, this refuge become a holy refuge. Under no circumstances will they give it or sacrifice it for anything or anyone. But for the Palestinian, this is my land, and I have to go back to it. This is because it belongs to me. Now you understand now, this is another set of, this is a mindset. It's a mindset, how do you reconcile that? Because even Palestinians today now came to the conclusion that if we were to fashion any kind of peace between Israelis and the Palestinians, we have to deal with this issue of the refugees. But then again, what government in Israel will accept the return of the refugees? And in doing so, basically it will wipe out almost overnight the Jewish character of the State of Israel. And mind you, this is not on my side taking side here or side there, but this is the reality that we have to face. Which basically it means if you ask me today and you are asking, why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to reconcile these differences? Because during all this period of time, not only the leaders on both sides maintain this position, this attitude, but they have perpetuated it by passing it on through public narrative to the following and the following generation. Although, if you were to ask even ordinary Israelis or ordinary Palestinians, how do you envision the peace to be? And they will tell you, there is no other way. Jerusalem will have to be a capital of two states. The Israelis could retain some of the settlement. There'll be some kind of land swap. Security for both sides will have to be established. And and the both sides will have to live side by side. And this is the point that I need to make for you, because for you to understand why is it, when you ask me why I am optimistic, I am optimistic not because I think that peace is going to happen tomorrow or next year. I'm optimistic because when I look at the realities on the ground, this is what we have to keep in mind. We have to ask ourselves the simple question: to what extent can the Israelis or the Palestinians change the reality on the ground? That is reality that is irrevocable. What is this reality? The reality is that Israelis and Palestinians now exist side by side. This coexistence is not one of many options, is the only option. Both are stuck, to put it bluntly and simply. They stuck with one another. But not only that they are stuck, they also know that neither side can dislodge the other, they can get rid of the other. Which basically it means if I am now coexist with this neighbor, I have to make choice what kind of coexistence I want to have. Do I want to kill and be killed for the next 70 years, 100 years? Or do I choose to live in peace and amity and prosperity and a future and hope? We are not there yet. But this fact on the ground is not subject to change short of catastrophic events. It won't change. And mind you, I want you to understand that both Israelis and Palestinians have come to this conclusion. But they haven't found a way because of the psychological impediment that continue to haunt both sides, not knowing how to go about to begin to make the necessary compromises that in order to achieve peace. So we have to understand this basic fact on the ground. There's another fact on the ground. Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city holy for the Muslims, for the Jews, and for the Christians. It's a fact. It's sitting there. No one contemplates that the Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock can be removed and put someplace else. No one can contemplate that the Wailing Wall, what's left of the Second Temple, should be just uprooted and put someplace else. This is something is going to stay there for as long as the eye can see. It's not going to change. Which basically it means if these holy sites are holy for the Arabs and holy for the Jews, and you cannot move them apart, then you're going to have to live with the fact that this is there, and we're going to have to continue to share it and live with it the way, in fact, that it is happening today. The holy Muslims and institutions and mosques are handled and administered by the Palestinian and the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. And the holy places of the Israelis are handled and administered by the Israelis themselves. So you might see that this fact, as a matter of fact, is a living one, and it's been already managed. And I'll come back when I address how I see a solution eventually could be fashioned. So this is another fact on the ground that we have to accept. It is not subject to change. There are other facts that have been created over the years. One of them is a string of settlements along the 1967 borders. Now, these settlements, I want you to understand, it's called settlements, but in fact, they are small cities. It is impossible under any circumstances, and I repeat, impossible under any circumstances to uproot this string of 3 blocks of settlement along the border. And these settlements house nearly 80% of the settlers in the West Bank. The Arab states and the Palestinian in various negotiations in the past, in 2000, in 2008, 2011 and 12, under the Obama administration, understood and agreed this settlement cannot be removed, and it will have to be some kind of land swap. If these settlements sit on about 4 or 5% of the West Bank, Israel will have to give the Palestinians exactly the same land contiguous with the same quality back to the Palestinian. So that the Palestinian will still recover 100% of the territories, albeit 5-6% of it not the same, provided it's contiguous and with the same quality. So this is another fact, which means any leader, Palestinian leader, who thinks for a moment that we can remove the settlement, it's not going to happen. But I'm talking about this ring of settlement. I'm not talking about the settlement throughout the West Bank. The other settlements throughout the West Bank are much smaller, and certainly many of them will have to be uprooted. There is no question about it. With the exception of one, which is deep into the West Bank, called Ariel. And that is something that both sides are going to have to deal with. And I will address it when I come to talk to the solution. So here then, talking about this other fact, which is the settlement, and both sides understood now this is going to have to be as part and parcel of any solution for the future. Now, what other facts exist that neither side can change? And you will look around and you will see that interdisbursement, you understand, interdisbursement of both Israelis and Palestinians is as such, it makes it impossible, I repeat, impossible to separate them. Jerusalem is a perfect example. Jerusalem has the largest Jewish and Palestinian community anywhere on earth. Nearly 275,000 Palestinians, about 450,000 Israelis. They are interdispersed. A majority live in East Jerusalem of Palestinian, majority of Jews live in West Jerusalem, but there are 200,000 Israelis live on the east side of Jerusalem. And there are thousands and tens of thousands of Palestinians also live on the west side of Jerusalem. Which means you cannot possibly, under any circumstances, to achieve a peace, to say, well, you have to be uprooted, you have to leave Jerusalem and go to someplace else, or we're going to have to take this city and divide it somewhere because we need to separate. You cannot separate demographically the Israelis from the Palestinians in various areas. Then you have the other element, which is absolutely critical, albeit is not connected directly to the Palestinian as such, to a Palestine, and that is the Israeli Arabs. That is Israeli-Palestinians. There are 1,800,000 Israeli Arabs in Israel. They are Israeli citizens. They are there. They're not going to go anywhere, nor so anyone can push them out. So here now you have another 1,008,000 Israelis living, Palestinians living in Israel as Israeli, full-fledged Israeli citizens. I'm not going to tell you they are treated 100% equally, but that's beside the point. They are full-fledged Israeli citizens. They can go and vote and be elected. And the last election they became the third largest party in Israel. So here too, interdisbursement of the population is irrevocable. You cannot change. Now, when you look at these four, and there are some others that I can mention to you, I'm going to leave some things for your questions. You come to the realization that the concept of two-state solution is not merely one of many options. It is the only option. And I must tell you, no matter what you hear people talk about, one state, creating some cantons by Israel to dominate Jenin and Ramallah and Bethlehem, this is not going to work because occupation as we know it is not sustainable and will never be sustainable. It is only a question of time. If there is no solution, well, there will be another major eruption, a bloody, probably the bloodiest eruption. So what we are saying now is the two-state solution, however difficult it may seem, it remains the easiest one given the circumstances that we face today. A two-state solution will have to come because both sides, not just Israel or the Palestinians, but both will benefit from it greatly. And let me speak about the Israelis first and then the Palestinians. Demographically, I mentioned to you that if Israel does not go for two-state solution, Israel as a Jewish state will no longer exist. Under one-state solution, Israel will be wiped out overnight if it's going to be democratic. And we have to understand this is a big if. That is, if Israel wants to acquire this land and in the West Bank and stay with it and hold on to it, it will have to make a choice. If it's going to be democratic, it will lose its national identity as such, and the Palestinian will be ruling all of Palestine. That is totally and utterly and completely unacceptable to any Jew in Israel, be that from the extreme left to the extreme right. So they rule out categorically the one-state solution. If you talk to the Palestinian, you have the same intensity and the same objection in terms of no one state, because one state, for them, it would become the only option. They will welcome it more than the Israelis, but they don't prefer not to, because they know one thing: if it is going to be as such, and they will demand equal rights, equal vote, they will be in control. So for Israel, it has the choice to make. If it's not going to give them equal right and in equal vote to everyone, then Israel will have to choose between a democratic state or an apartheid state. There is no other choice. For the Palestinian, they will have an incredibly, very credible case to make to the international community. That is, this is not a setup that they will ever be able to accept. Which means the two-state solution, why it remains therefore viable, because it does answer the needs, the requirement, the emotional, the psychological, the religious, national security concern of both sides, provided that they can live in peace. That is, here the word peace is everything. That is, you can do almost anything you want if peace prevails. You can hardly do anything if there is no peace. And this is really, I want you to understand, this is the point of departure here. Israel has the right to exist as an independent Jewish state. It was created in 1947 by the United Nations Partition Plan and was recognized by the United Nations as a Jewish state. The same resolution, the partition plan, recognized also the Palestinian to have the right to exercise, to establish their own Palestinian state. That was in 1947, mind you. Israel went along and immediately declared the establishment of a Palestinian state, and tragically and unfortunately, the Palestinians refused at that time to utilize, to exploit that option, because they were encouraged by the Arab states not to accept it, because they still believe that they can get the Israelis out of there, and hence the war of 1948 took place. I want you to understand, none of what I'm saying to you today justify the action or inaction by either side. This is just the basic realities, and anyone who denies it, then he or she does not know the reality on the ground. I repeat, had the Palestinians accepted the partition plan, we would not be sitting here and talking about the problem between Israel and the Palestinians. But subsequently to that, as when the war of 1967 occurred and Israel was able to occupy 3 times the size of its own territory in 6 days, well, for many Israelis right of center, the zealot Zionist ideologues who still believe in the entirety of the land, that is, the land that was bequeathed to the Jews, for them, the capture of Jerusalem, it was as if a signal given from God, that God made it possible for them now to reacquire Jerusalem. So you have now what 1967 war created, a constituency that was growing and growing over time, believing as if it were God himself or herself for that matter, that made it possible for them to go back to their own homeland, ancient homeland. And this movement continued to grow in leaps and bounds to this very day. For the Palestinians, the war and the conquest of Israel could not and did not change anything. For them, this is our land. It was ours before Israel came to being, and it will have to continue to be ours. And no new facts on the ground can change that. And this is really where we are today, with one additional point that I need to make for you, and that is what happened over the last 70 years, and specifically since 1967, nearly 50 years, is that both sides, in one form or another, wanted to perpetuate this, sometimes the fantasy, that either can have it all. And I must tell you, neither Israel nor the Palestinian can have it all. It will never happen. That is, as long as there is strong constituencies on both sides that seek a whole thing or nothing, that's not going to happen. There will be no peace. There will be no two-state solution. So then now you have to ask me then the question, what is going to take? Who is going to make this happen? Can they themselves resolve this conflict by themselves? Now you all understand there were many efforts made by specifically the United States and the international community, the Quartet, and before that, to try to negotiate a process, to enter into negotiating process to get the two sides together. There were some successes and some failures, but on the whole, many things just simply did not take place because either side have maintained certain two constituencies, extremist. On the Palestinian side, you have a very extremist constituency in the name of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others. On the Israeli side, you have a very extremist constituency, part of the Likud party, now the Jewish Home led by Naftali Bennett and Lieberman. And these groups on both sides, the extremists on both sides, making it almost impossible for their leadership to make the kind of concession necessary in order to achieve an agreement. That's one major problem that needs to be overcome. The second major problem that needs to be overcome is the lack of leadership. I'm talking about on both sides. Leadership with vision, with courage, to go against the current. Vision and courage like Anwar Sadat had. He knew he was doing something that was totally unacceptable to the rest of the Arab world, but he went for it. Because he then recognized already in 1977, 78, that Israel is a fact of life, it cannot be removed, it cannot be uprooted. Arafat, in his later years, also came to the same recognition. But unfortunately, be that Yitzhak Rabin, who also concluded the same thing, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated because he was moving in that direction. Anwar Sadat was killed because he made peace with Israel. Yasser Arafat was struck as well. And even Ariel Sharon, it is as if it was a curse. Somebody was cursing. Any leader who attempted to change the status quo was struck. But I'm not suggesting to you that this has been ordained. It's got to have to remain this way. Because we still have two people sitting side by side, must live together in one form or another. But because there is no courageous visionary leadership today, outsiders will have to come in and do something about it. Now, you know, the United States attempted and the Quartet attempted, and all these efforts were made. But the various governments in Israel and the governments in Ramallah were not able, because of the resistance of the extremists on both sides, and because of this political factionalism within the two community, it made it impossible for them to make a move that is require such significant concessions on both sides. And so now we are faced where we are today. Where we as a result of all of this, of course, there's zero trust between the two sides. Neither recognize that the other party is really already willing and able partner to the negotiations. And when you have an individual like Netanyahu, who is not committed, absolutely in my view, not committed to a two-state solution, and certainly other Palestinian leaders like Ismail Haniyeh and others also not committed to a two-state solution, you're going to continue to try to find out under what circumstances this status quo can be modified, can be changed to bring it closer to what has to happen, and that is a peaceful solution that will lead to two-state solution. Now I suggest to you that leaving them to their own devices, and I have met and talked ad nauseum over the years with both sides in every which way you can imagine. I can tell you one very important point, that there is a consistent majority, I repeat, consistent majority of Israelis and Palestinians who want an end to this horrible conflict. Do not be misled by the fact that Netanyahu was re-elected when he formed a government that is not willing to sit down and negotiate in earnest. Netanyahu won 30 seats out of 120, with Naftali Bennett as another 7 or 8. So the extremists, for all intent and purposes, do not really represent the total, the population of the Israelis, the Israeli population. Well, I again said, every poll that has been taken among the Israelis and the Palestinians, including Gaza, between 68 to 75 on both sides, endorse peace based on two-state solution. This is a fact, and we have to understand that. And I can also tell you that even current leaders, you can exclude perhaps Netanyahu, you can exclude Haniyeh and others, and some of the Islamic Jihad leaders, came to the conclusion the same thing. Mahmoud Abbas, for all intent and purposes, because what I know, what many of my colleagues know, what many people in the Israeli government know, he means it, and he would like to see peace happening based on a two-state solution, but his hands are tied because he has these extremists who won't let him make the kind of concession necessary to advance the process. So what he would like to see for Israel to make some kind of concession, for example, to stop the expansion of the settlement, to release some prisoners. Israel, and from his perspective, being that it is the more powerful country, that has the means, economic means, specifically military means, as an extraordinarily powerful nation, it can afford to make concessions. It can afford to take limited risks. And if should the Palestinians do not deliver, Israel can still prevail. So he would like to see some gesture made by the Israelis. The Israelis on the other side are saying, well, how do you want us to negotiate when you have a group called Hamas representing roughly 40% of the Palestinian community who in their own charter say, we seek the complete and utter destruction of the state of Israel. Do you expect us to negotiate with an entity that wants to destroy us? They view Hamas the way they view Iran. So this is the nature of the deadlock. The nature of the deadlock that neither side can make a significant move toward the other. And the activities on the day in and day out, the building of the settlements, the continuing occupation, the hardship of the Palestinians, the problem that is being caused on both sides, it is making it increasingly more difficult to come to the table and begin to negotiate in earnest in order to achieve peace, which is ultimately the only viable, practical solution. And nowadays, given the situation today, I'm always asked what can be done. And I would just quickly suggest to you a couple of things that I've been mentioning, and specifically now that I'm with the European Parliament, certainly with the State Department in the United States, certainly among the Israelis, the Palestinians, that the time has come now for to introduce another new dimension in order to begin to unravel this very complex situation. And that is perhaps the introduction of some kind of United Nations resolution, not merely to give the Israelis and the Palestinians 2 years to negotiate an agreement to reach a two-state agreement, but it will also require them to follow what they have agreed upon before. That is to provide them also with a framework. That means they must sit down and negotiate under certain framework that's based on agreement that they have been able to achieve before. As a matter of fact, the United States for some time now has prepared such a framework, but it's never really officially presented to other side. A resolution should also include consequences, that if you don't reach an agreement, you will suffer the consequences. For example, Israel could be subjected to sanction, divestment, which the European community already began to talk about. In fact, they're doing something about it. It could lose some of the United States, almost a given political support. It's been given, but it's no longer maybe given at this juncture. The Palestinian could also suffer. The European community has been providing the Palestinian tremendous support over so many years, decades. And they can exercise tremendous influence also on the Palestinians. That is, the international community, a resolution such as this in the Security Council, that would also include the Arab Peace Initiative. Why the Arab Peace Initiative? Because the Arab Peace Initiative has elements that all sides can accept. Even Israeli, right of center, and even Hamas, there are elements in the Arab Peace Initiative they can accept. So if these negotiations are to be conducted under that kind of umbrella, there will be consequences. The umbrella of the Arab Peace Initiative. It's time for them to reach an agreement based on a prior agreement that had been achieved before. There is a small window of opportunity now, and I'm talking about now, for the next maybe 16 months, while President Obama is still in office. The one other point I was making throughout my conversation in Brussels, that is, Obama is extremely disillusioned with Netanyahu. This is not a secret. They can't stand each other. They hate each other with passion. He's on his way out. He can take a political risk today. He couldn't do that maybe 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 2 years ago, but he can do it today. That is, he can make that decision by supporting a resolution, provided that resolution does not call immediately for a two-state solution to be created today, a Palestinian state to be created, but through the negotiation which the United States has been preaching all along. If he succeeds and the process goes forward, and he can leave with the White House feeling that he has done something. And if this effort fails, well, he is out of the White House. And he can take the credit if there's a success, but he will not be taking the blame if there's another failure. He will have to leave it to the next president of the United States to carry on whatever has transpired in the interim. So I mentioned this to you today. I could not have made the same statement even a year ago in connection with this type of approach, because a year or two ago, the political dynamics in the Middle East were completely different. But there is another element, and people ask me about this time and again and everywhere I go. Do you really think that given the turmoil in the Middle East, given the rise of ISIS, the dismantling, disintegration of Syria, the war between the Sunni and the Shia, the problems with Iran, with all this turmoil that is sweeping the region now and perhaps for years, if not decades to come, and I repeat the word decades, I want you to know. You think this is the right time to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And my answer to that is exactly that. It's precisely the right time. There cannot be no better time. That is, The Palestinian and the Israelis, if they want to deal with the future instability of the region and the future conflicts, a very bloody conflict, very violent conflict, it is better that they put out the fire in their backyard first. And they need to understand that. As a matter of fact, throughout the last 4 or 5 decades, I wanted to know that the Israelis have never, and the Arab state, have never seen eye to eye more than they see eye to eye today. And why is that? Because of Iran. They're both terrified of Iran's ambition in the region. And they find Saudis, Gulf state, Morocco, Tunisia, and others are dealing, they're talking to the Israelis, they're sharing information, they're sharing a great deal. Because they have a common enemy, and that common enemy is Iran. That also provides another layer, another opportunity for them to come further, to come closer. And the Saudis and others made it plain, made it clear. They will be supporting any resumption of a peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians. They, along with the rest of the Gulf state, along with certainly with Egypt. So this window of opportunity, and I tried to impart this with the members that I made from the European Union, in groups and individuals. And I think they listened very carefully. That this is a time, there's a small window that need to be focused on, need to be capitalized on. I don't know what will happen a year or 2 or 3 down the line, but I know one thing. If there is no resolution today, the situation will be only worse 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And the tragedy is that so many more Israelis and Palestinians will die in vain because they cannot change one basic, simple reality on the ground. They coexist, and they will continue to exist whether they like it or not. I see no reason why another Palestinian child or an Israeli child to be killed when in fact that death can and must be prevented. This tragedy must come to an end. And if I were myself, like many others like me, could have easily said, well, this is intractable, it's impossible to resolve. Let it be. Let me go and do something else, occupy myself with other issues, with other problems. But I must tell you one thing. The years that I have spent, nearly my entire adult life, involved in conflict resolution, and I made the Israeli-Palestinian conflict one of my prime objectives to deal with, address it, write about it, preach about it, negotiate, make every effort humanly possible. I look at myself today, and I must tell you with all honesty and in every ounce of integrity, I do not have 1 second of regret, no matter where we stand today in this conflict. The effort to resolve it must continue, and must be continue because I go back and repeat to you, there is no reason, there is no cause, no rhyme to have another one Israeli or Palestinian child to die for something that should have been avoided, could have been avoided many, many years ago. Thank you very much.